All right, Erica, here we go. So five, four, three, two, and one. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, Erika Shershun. Erika, welcome.
Thank you, Guy. It's nice to be here.
Awesome. So Erica is a somatic psychotherapist who specializes in helping sexual trauma survivors reclaim the life they were meant to live. She's the author of the Healing Sexual Trauma Workbook, the Healing Sexual Trauma Guided Journal, and the facilitator of the PESI Sexual Trauma Clinical Training, as well as the upcoming Sexual Trauma Healing Journey. Her approach is trauma informed, rooted in somatic principles, draws on neuroscience and integrative modalities like EMDR and energy psychology. Erica, welcome.
Thank you. I just want to add that the journal is out next year, early next year,
Okay.
the guided journal.
October. Okay. Okay. Awesome. Erica, before we get going here, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
So, where I'm from originally is I grew up in a military family. We moved a lot, and I spent my young adulthood trying to escape the underlying pain of trauma. Once I turned 18, I continued to move around. Um, and I also moved from one job and relationship and along with each city.
Okay.
And it was like really a sense of feeling unable to gain grounding or stability with all that sort of, I didn't know it at the time, but sort of trying to escape trauma, including sexual trauma.
Okay. And we'll get to that. But where are you living now? In what
Oh,
like what?
now I'm
Yeah.
living in San Francisco,
Okay.
California.
All right, cool. All right, well let's start. I mean, so how did all this start for you? You touched upon it a little bit.
Yeah, so it it started in that way, like I mentioned, just traumas in my childhood and also as a young adult. And I would read a lot of books, psychology books, self help books, spiritual books to try to heal.
Are we talking
That
interpersonal
was,
trauma, sexual trauma? Trauma,
yes.
you said traumas. Okay.
Well, yeah, there was sexual traumas and also the trauma of losing my father to suicide.
Mm,
So he was a veteran and had undiagnosed PTSD, and we just knew so much less about trauma at that time. And there were other traumas as well,
mhm.
but in any case, they all impacted me in ways I didn't understand at the time and left me searching for something. Really, again, like trying to escape my inner world. Um,
So
but
what age are we talking about now? When
in my late teens and 20s,
okay. And during that time, did you were you aware that had been impacted by these particular traumas?
I was, however, in terms of the sexual traumas, I really pushed them away. I didn't think about them a lot because I didn't want to feel like a victim. And and thinking about them made me feel that way. So also the shame associated with sexual trauma that every survivor I've ever worked with feels or has felt. I've only come across one survivor who's told me they did not, or they posted it to social media that they
Hmm.
haven't felt shame. And
Hmm.
it's the only time I've seen that. And it's possible they just haven't acknowledged that to themselves. So there was that as well. It really makes it hard to look at it. There wasn't Me Too then. There wasn't a place to talk about it.
So at this point, you're what, 18, 19?
Yes,
Where are
and
you go?
into
What are
my
you doing? Where are
20s.
you going?
Well, that's what I was trying to figure out right? So eventually I finally stopped running and settled in San Francisco. And then I was overcome with depression, in part because it felt like, well, I'm finally living where I really want to live, and something still isn't right. And so, you know, I sought out healing, and um, the sexual traumas at the root of my symptoms and much of my pain were brushed over or not addressed at all by the series of therapists I saw for nearly
Mhm.
2 decades.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
So,
let me pause you for a second there. So you're in San Francisco. Are you alone at this time?
well, I was off and on in relationships
Okay. Okay.
in terms of
And
alone,
you
but
real
alone in terms of family. I didn't have any. When I moved here, I didn't know anyone here.
so you get to San Francisco, you realize you said you experienced depression, but you realize something needs to happen. I need to get some help. You start seeing therapists for 20 years. Um, now, did you realize that there had been sexual trauma during this time? Or was it that these therapists like just did not go there?
I did know I had not fully repressed the traumas, other than something that happened when I was an infant. So, um, so otherwise, I was very much aware of them. But again, they weren't like at the forefront. I
Right.
shared them with each therapist I saw, and they would just be dropped. You know, they wouldn't get into doing healing work around those. So, I did feel grateful for some of the healing work I received in that time in terms of helping process the the loss of my father, and and there was another big family loss that that played into all of that. And so there was something I was getting out of it,
Hmm.
um, and processing other relational things that came up. But a lot of it still, it wasn't integrative work, so I would still get triggered by some of these things.
At what point did things shift for you? What point did maybe you encounter a therapist who was like, okay,
Yeah, so at one point I was attending a trigger point therapy training. I had become a massage therapist and a Reiki practitioner. And while attending that training, the instructor asked if I wanted to volunteer for a neck demo. And I thought, like, this is such a great opportunity to receive. His name's Eric Rubin, and he's an expert chiropractor and body worker and Reiki master. And I was stunned when the words no flew from my lips. I just had this feeling of repulsion come over me.
wait, so
And
you were he was touching your neck?
no, I said no.
So initially, okay,
He asked to
okay.
demonstrate on my neck. And so a male student eagerly stepped up to volunteer, and he shared of trauma, uh, a neck trauma that had been life threatening. And that really brought up one of my assaults. And and when I went back to the table to practice with my partner, my hands went numb, and I couldn't,
Mm.
just moments earlier, I could feel the most gentle little grain size piece of constriction, and now I could feel nothing. And so that was kind of terrifying, and confusion and panic set in. And the instructor suggested I take a break in an adjoining room. And alone in that cold, dark room, my body just began to tremble, and I was flooded with emotion as I felt pulled back in time to that traumatic experience from, at this point, it was 25 years earlier, or around that. And then other traumas with similar themes emerged. And, I just didn't understand why my body was suddenly reacting this way. It was, I had no self agency, no control. I didn't realize it at the time, but
How old were you at this at time?
I was experiencing intense dissociation and flashbacks, but I didn't know that. Um, I was I was in my 40s at
Okay.
this time. Yeah, I don't remember exactly, but I think around 47.
Okay.
So when he saw my distress, he recommended I read Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine. And at home that evening, I just I laid back on my couch and I was instantly flooded with memories of sexual
Wow.
trauma and overcome with shame and grief. And in that moment, I realized just how much I'd been impacted by unintegrated trauma,
Wow.
how those wounds had shaped every aspect of my life,
So you're in your
mostly in ways I
mid,
wouldn't have chosen.
you're mid to late 40s at this point.
Yeah,
Are you a therapist at this time?
no,
Okay. What kind of work were you doing?
I was doing the massage therapy and Reiki work.
Okay. Wow. So you have this very intense kind of paradigm shifting experience. W- Where does that lead you? What do you do?
Well, I as soon as I got my hands on Waking the Tiger, I read it and it answered a lot of questions I hadn't known to ask. And it was a groundbreaking book. And yet it didn't give me the practical tools I needed and the insight I needed to heal from the sexual traumas. So it took me several more years to piece together what worked. But what happened is it inspired me to go to grad school to become a somatic therapist. So the rest of my healing, really the majority of my healing from sexual trauma, took place while I was going to grad school and soon after that. And it was really by piecing together a lot of what I was reading, courses I was taking outside of the grad school, and just applying and practicing everything that worked for me until I was symptom free.
So this book, Peter Levine's book, was very inspiring to you. And I mean, aside from that, what was the impetus for you to become a therapist? Were you like, I want to work on myself and this will help me, or look, I want to help others who've gone through what I've gone through? Was it a combination of those things?
It was an interest in human behavior that I'd had for years and years. I'd kind of gone in a different track and gotten involved in the arts for a lot of that time leading up to then. And just I realized either I was going to go way deeper, excuse me, into body work or go into psychology at that time to help people heal from trauma. And I felt more drawn to go into the direction of psychology, but including the body. And I honestly thought I was further along in my healing than I was when I started grad school because, it's a process to apply and get into school. So I was working to heal in that time in between and did think I was further along. Um, had I known how hard it would be to go through grad school while suffering from PTSD, I don't know if I would have done it at that time.
You said, within like 2 decades, therapists you had seen just did not kind of drop the ball. What do you wish one of those therapists had said to you, had said?
Yeah, I wish they had said that they didn't. specialize in treating trauma and referred me to someone who did.
Yeah, that would have been the ethical thing to do
Yeah,
and the smart thing to do. Yeah.
and excuse me, I see it in my practice all the time. People come to me with similar stories. It's not always, in my case, it was 17 years. And then there were several more years while I was in grad school. So I see people that come in. Sometimes it's 20 years or more, sometimes it's 5, but there's quite a bit of that, of people that find their way to me who have been really struggling, and often they're they're lacking hope at that point, or they're very angry, or a combination of both, and it's understandable. The average lifetime cost of being a survivor is one 122,000. Um, and let me see, I have it somewhere. Um, it's $122,461. And so that's the impact of sexual assault across
The
survivors'
monetary
lifetimes.
impact, obviously.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. The monetary effect. So, from doing all of that therapy and also a lot of like missed work. So this was the
Hmm.
CDC estimate per victim lifetime from 2017.
The
So
psychological impact is probably far greater than that, though.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. It impacts relationships. It impacts every aspect of a survivor's life, depending on, how many resources they have available to them internally and externally. So um, yeah, it's understandable when
Hmm.
people come in angry.
You know, I want to shift gears here and talk about your book, The Healing Sexual Trauma Workbook. Now, you had mentioned that one of your books was banned. Is that the one that was banned?
Yes, that's it.
So, first of all, before we get there, what was the inspiration for writing the book, and who's it for?
The book is for survivors, and also a lot of therapists use it with clients that are survivors. So it's it was to help make healing possible for those who didn't have access to it, or for those who are working with a therapist who didn't have training in how to work with sexual trauma or trauma in general, which is, quite a lot.
Hmm.
As you are well aware, there's a lot of therapists who don't have adequate training in trauma. Um,
So
so
there are obviously a lot of books out there. What give our listeners indication of what they might get out of this book? I mean, can you give us an idea of the outline of the book?
Sure. Um, so the outline of the book is, um, it starts out with, I think, what trauma work always needs to start out with, which is just maintaining a felt sense of safety. So it starts out there and goes into a foundational practice that I use for that. And then it goes into helping survivors understand what's happening in their nervous system, what's going on, why they responded the way they did during the sexual assault, because a lot of shame is
Hmm.
wrapped up in that. And unfortunately, and also so that they understand as their symptoms come up, how to work with them. So it teaches them how to regulate their nervous system and how to know what to do when they get triggered, depending on which state they're in their nervous system. So what they do if they're in sympathetic is going to be different than what they do if they're in a dorsal vagal state.
Okay.
And then it goes into working with the body somatically, why that's important, and a lot of exercises to help become comfortable tapping into the body
Mhm.
and feeling safe enough to do so, because that is so important in the work. It covers trauma and memory, and what happened when what happens when anyone's in an overwhelming traumatizing experience, to memory, and again tying that into the body, since we remember procedurally and emotionally. Memory is implicit with trauma. So, so many survivors also come in with early childhood trauma, and they don't, they struggle because they don't have a clear memory of what happened. And there's so much confusion related to that, on top of the confusion of what was happening to them at the time when they
Mhm.
weren't familiar with sex and what was being done to them. And um, so it helps so much to educate on these things that play into what happened in their body and why their body responded the way it did, to help diffuse the shame and also to help empower.
Mhm.
So the practices throughout the book really help empower them. And there's a chapter dedicated to boundaries, which is so important since their boundaries were violated and shattered. And um, many of them went into the strategy of fawn. So the please and appease, and they haven't learned necessarily how to really make healthy boundaries. Often they haven't had the permission to do
Right,
so.
right.
So, and it's not for only for people who responded in a fawn response. I find most anyone I work with can benefit from some boundary work. And then we go into emotions and some resilience
Okay,
exercises.
okay. And again, that is the Healing Sexual Trauma Workbook. Now, why was it banned and where was it banned?
They don't, no one gave me a reason why it was banned, and no one notified me outside of a newscaster from that town. So I don't know if
Where,
it's
where,
banned.
where?
It was in Davis, Michigan, and it was the school district in that area that banned it from a
Wow.
high school library.
Okay.
So um, it, what I learned after that from the Velshi Book Club, Ari Velshi, he's an MSNBC newscaster, and he does a banned book club. And he said that the books that are most frequently targeted, they found like an alarming trend, and that they share the same three topics: sexual identity, racism in America. So I was well aware of both of those, but this
Hmm.
last one I didn't know: women's bodily autonomy, including sexual assault and rape. So why is that being banned? Why do people want to
Hmm.
prevent survivors from healing? It's
Yeah,
a pretty bleak.
pretty traumatic.
Yeah, it's pretty terrifying to realize what's going on in this country,
Oh my
honestly, and
God.
this is a big part of it.
So you also have something coming up called the Sexual Trauma Healing Journey. What is that?
It's That is a course so it will be a live weekly teaching and Q&A.
Okay.
And it's a 6-month course
Okay.
to help survivors heal.
For survivors, for therapists or
No,
no,
it's for
no, just for
survivors.
survivors. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. And we'll have that linked up again at the show notes page here at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. So let me, as we kind of wind down here, Erica, again, I know people listening are therapists of varying kinds, survivors also. You touched upon the fact that, and I can't get this out of my head, that for 20 years, you were going through healing and seeing therapists, but people just weren't getting, people weren't educated, I guess is what it comes down to. What do you say? What would you say? What do you want to say to those therapists out there who want to start learning about getting educated in trauma in this field?
I think it would be great if they did. I think it's a rare therapist who doesn't have a client who's at some point or many who've had sexual trauma, given the high numbers of it. And if they don't want to go in that direction, which is okay, no one wants to specialize in everything or even work with it. I do think it's better that clients who are sexual trauma survivors see a specialist, but I do also think it's great that therapists are working with the book in their sessions. And what I would recommend, though, for those who do want to treat it, is that they train in one of the extensive trauma modalities like sensory motor or somatic experiencing,
Hmm.
and also become familiar specifically with the literature on sexual trauma
Right.
and how to work with survivors.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate what you said. I mean, not everyone wants to specialize in trauma, and that's fine. But my feeling is that as a therapist, one has an obligation to at least be somewhat informed
Yeah,
about trauma and what it is and how to identify it. And like you said, become somewhat familiar with the literature.
I agree. I
Yeah,
again, like, how do you not see clients who don't have trauma?
right.
I think it's a huge disservice that grad schools don't offer more training in trauma.
Yeah,
We had one class.
yeah. Yeah. All right, Erica. As we kind of close out here, what's the best way for people to contact you?
So, in terms of therapy, it's at my therapist website, Erika Shershun therapy.com. And then for I have the first chapter of the Healing Sexual Trauma Workbook available if you go to healingsexualtrauma.com. And I also have a blog there and newsletter. So
Okay. Linksexualtrauma.com. We'll have that linked up here. Again, it's the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Erica, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate you sharing your story and sharing your journey. It's inspiring. I mean, what I think the courage it takes to come on this a podcast and do that. And then to what, to now do what you're doing and helping others is so inspiring. I really appreciate you coming here.
thank you so much, Guy. And it's a real honor to be here and have the opportunity to speak with your listeners. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, we'll be in touch. Take care.